Hello and welcome to yet another virtual event with Tattered Cover Bookstore. My name is Adam. I'm the director of events for this amazing bookstore. And if you don't know anything about Tattered Cover, you're just here because of today's guests. Let me tell you a little bit about us. We are now 51 years old. We just celebrated our 50th anniversary last year. We're located in Denver, Colorado, and we are not the country's, the state's largest independent bookstore with multiple locations throughout Denver and Colorado Springs coming soon. You can learn more about us at tatteredcover.com. Today, we're here to celebrate two amazing women who wrote two amazing books. One is out now and one is coming out shortly. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about them, and then I'll turn it over to our two amazing guests. First, we are celebrating the release of The First, the Few, the Only, which is a book by Deepa Purushothaman, who told me I could skip her last name, but I tried anyway. So sorry, Deepa, if I messed that up. She is the co-founder of N-Formation, a company for women of color by women of color. She is also a woman and public policy program leader in practice at Harvard Kennedy School, as well as being an Aspen Fellow. Deepa and her husband live in Los Angeles with their dogs and an endless list of home renovations. In conversation with her is Daisy Auger Dominguez, whose book, Inclusion Revolution, The Essential Guide to Dismantling Racial Inequality in the Workplace, comes out next week. She has made it her mission to make workplaces more equitable and inclusive. As the Chief People Officer at Vice Media Group, Daisy leads a global team responsible for people operations, diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, corporate facilities, and real estate procurement, and social impact practices. She serves on the boards of Planned Parenthood Federation of America, Brooklyn Children's Museum, Robert Starling Clark Foundation, and St. Anne's Warehouse. Please welcome these two amazing women who wrote two books that you need to get now because they will help solve the problems that we face in America. Deepa and Daisy, please join us. Welcome to this virtual event.
Thank you so much, Adam.
Thank you.
And I will turn it over to you all. But I do want to say anyone out there in the virtual world who has a question, ask it in the YouTube chat, and I'll make sure we'll ask Daisy and Deepa the questions in a few minutes. But y'all have a great chat.
Thank you, Adam.
Thank
Hey,
you.
Deepa.
Hi, I'm so excited to be in conversation with you at this exciting time for both of us, right?
It really is. It's not only an exciting time for both of us because we're first-time authors getting our books out there, but the subject matter that we write about is something that we both are so deeply passionate about. And I've been sort of holding onto your book with giddiness, and thinking about this conversation. And the first thing that comes to mind is, your book is The First, the Few, the Only. And you and I have been the first, the few, and the only. But in this conversation, we are the everything. It's like, which is pretty exciting. I was like, those of you who are listening in, you have two women of color who have risen through the ranks of corporate America, by sheer will and grit. And now we get to be in conversation and share that with you, and celebrate your book, Deepa, and celebrate what made you write this book? And I think that's a question that I've been getting asked a lot. And I wanted to start with, what inspired you to write this book? What were the things that went to your mind when you decided to do this and take those first steps of becoming an author?
Yeah, I mean, I've always enjoyed writing, so I should start with that. I never had grand ideas of writing a book though, but I have always liked writing. So I will share that. For me, it was really simple. Like, I struggled toward the last couple of years of my career for a variety of issues. If you read the book, a lot of them health related, stress related, really questioning my place in the world. I had a growing question around purpose that came in, was there always, but really started to grow for me towards the end before I left corporate. And I'm a year and a half out of corporate. So it's not like, years and years and years. And so I wrote the book because I wanted to show women of color that they were not alone. I felt so alone navigating, and you're shaking your head, so I'm sure you did as well. Like, I think most of us have been taught, and this is even true in the book when I interviewed the 500 women of color I spoke with. I think we've all been taught to kind of go it alone, to rise, to make it work. And we're so busy and we're so heads down that I didn't have a ton of friends around me that I could even have these conversations with because I was so busy. And so, for me, it was really simple. I just wanted the book that I wish I'd had when I started, but then also would help people not feel so alone, because I don't think that the way at least that I did it, and you're shaking your head. So I'm going to say the way you and I did it is the smart way to do it anymore. It's too isolating, and it takes too much from us. So that's really why I wrote it.
And it's so special as I was reading your book, there were so many places that I felt like that this is my story. I was like, this is not me going through this, but for a human being, the most important thing that we want is to feel seen, valued, and understood. And reading this book validated so much of my experience as a woman of color navigating the workplace, and the good, the bad, and the ugly. And all of it is there. I call it the emotional armor that we have to put on before we go to work every day. And it's an invisible armor. And to your point, it's not one that we tell people, hey, I'm putting it on now, and this is why. We just simply get used to, or we have fallen into the false assumption that is the only way to survive. And you're telling us in your book, it's not. It doesn't have to be. So thank you.
And I also think, to your point, we don't talk about the fact that of the toll it takes. Like a lot of the book, people initially pick it up and think it's going to be about trailblazing, and it is about trailblazing, but there is a dark side or a shadow side to trailblazing that we don't talk about, the loneliness, right? And that is really what I wanted to unpack, because I want more of us to rise. My dream would be to go from the first, the few, the only, to the many. But in order to do that, we have to have more conversations about how hard it is, and what it takes, and how we do that differently. So yes, I agree with you.
Let's talk a little bit about that. And you write that the structure of corporate America was not built for us or by us. What does that mean for women of color trying to navigate their careers?
Yeah, and I now add, Daisy, because I'm a number of these interviews in or discussions, and I say not made by us or for us. It doesn't even really want us there some of the time. Yes. You're going to add that to it too. What that means is I just don't think we were I know we were not in the seats when it was envisioned, right? It was created in a very different mindset. When it was created, there was this idea there was going to be a 2-parent household, and one parent was going to stay home and raise the children, and another, usually the man, was going to go out into the world and do those things. And the corporate workplace is set up in that way, like the hours, the after hours, all the extra things that get asked of us, the blending and the overtime, all of those things really set up for a structure where it's really hard to have an outside life and to raise children and to do all these other things. And I just don't think it's also created with this idea that people can look like us and rise, and that leaders can look like us. So a lot of the book is really about the pressures of conformity and the fact that we don't talk about that, and that there are soft messages and there are strong messages to conform. And if we don't unpack that, folks like you and I will end up conforming, sometimes consciously, sometimes unconsciously, but in the end, get sick, tired, struggling because we've lost ourselves. And that's really what this is about and what we need to change. I tell a story in the book that I'll tell in short form around the airplane, where Renee Myers from Netflix and I sat down, and she was, started talking about airplane design, and she's a taller Black woman. And when she was saying when she had children, she used to worry about luggage falling on her children's head. And that's how she started telling the story. And I jumped in because I'm 5'1", so I'm pretty little. And so the process of getting luggage above my head into the bins is a real struggle, and something I really think about. I did it yesterday, 15 minutes, half an hour before I get on the plane. Like, who's going to help me? Am I going to look silly as I'm trying to do that?
I have the same problem. I'm 5'2".
You get it. So it's a real thing that I worry about. And the point is that the gentleman sitting next to me who's 5'10" or taller isn't even thinking about either of Renee's, children's challenges or mine. And the point is, within a few minutes of getting on the airplane, we're all experiencing it fundamentally different. So I feel like I don't belong within 5 minutes of getting on. And that same sort of idea can translate to the workplace. And part of why I think that happened with airplane design, I went and did the research, is that only 2 or 3% of airplane designers were actually women. And I think the same sort of analogy can then kind of go to the workplace, right? We weren't there. And I want to believe you and I would design it differently if we were to sit down and design it now. And I think that's what we're actually doing. We are telling companies and telling people this is how it needs to evolve, so that it does not accommodate us, but actually allows us to be in full voice, which is, I think, what this work is really about.
So you talk about the change that needs to happen in organizations and within ourselves. What is that change? What needs to change?
I think we need to be more conscious of the ways in which we edit ourselves. So that's a lot of what I'm talking about. And I, showcase a number of different ways in which we edit ourselves. And I think for a lot of women of color, they don't realize that they're doing it. And so a common story I found from the most senior women I interviewed was they would say to me, Deepa, I assumed once I got to the seat, I would do it differently. Like once I got to the seat, I would do it my way because I was in power. But there's actually more pressure, less ability to do it your way at the top level because you've sacrificed so much to get there. And when you start to behave in a way that's different than how you rose, your colleagues look at you and don't allow you to do that. Don't make room for that. They actually expect you to toe the line, is what some of the women said in the book. And so this idea that you can maybe compromise and at some point you'll get to do it a different way is part of the false narrative that I think most of us have convinced ourselves to make a go of it. And that's just one example, but that's the ways in which I think we've told ourselves we can do it differently. And so I talk about a number of delusions that have been set up in corporate America and how we need to be aware of them, and then we can work around them. Our work, I think, is to change some of them, but we need to even make sure that we understand that they're there so that we can even, find our voice and find our power. So that's really what I'm talking about.
And talk to me about being a first, because I think about finding our power and I often say that, just as I was desperately trying to find and bring more people to the table, I had to desperately fight to keep my own seat at the table. And the irony wasn't lost on me that I'm trying to bring in people in, and I'm going like, but I also need to play within the confines of this organization so that I can stay here, so that I can do this. And all the while, the damage that caused to me and the pain and the angst, as I'm trying to eradicate some of that on others, a lot of it was because I felt, as you did, I was the only one in those seats. So if I left, then who else was going to advocate? Who else was going to do that? So talk to me a bit about what being both the first and the few. How did that shape your career? What impact did that have on the development of your career?
And I think it's an example where it's a double-edged sword. There were a lot of opportunities that came my way because I was the first, right? And because I sat in the seat early and I made partner young and all of these things. But I think that shadow side isn't something that we talked about because there were a lot of things coming my way. I felt it most acutely, Daisy, when I was thinking of leaving. So I probably knew I wanted to leave three years before I did. It was complicated. I say partnership is like tenured professorship, where I fought so hard to get there. And so it doesn't make sense that I was leaving at the height of a lot of different things. But the biggest reason that I didn't feel like I could leave was I felt responsible to the women of color coming up around me and coming up after me. I thought my leaving, because I was the first, would represent, my own failure, but also might signal that I couldn't hack it and that other women couldn't hack it and other women of color couldn't hack it. And the only way I got around that was, and Ra was my coach at the time and now my business partner, we started meeting with women of color. I started one-on-one, two-on-two, and then at one point, Ra and I did these dinners across the country that became the foundation for the book and also for information. And I started to see in these rooms of conversation how many shared experiences we had as a result of being the only. And it gave me the power to realize that sitting in this seat and struggling through, and I was very sick. So that's the other backstory. So big question around purpose and what I want to do with my life kind of came to a really nexus point with my health. And so my health started failing me because of the stress and because of the pressure. And I had a doctor actually say to me, like, I think your job is killing you. You need to step back and think about something else. And I talk about in the book, it was a very dramatic point. It still took me time after that to leave because I had to meet other women of color, realize it wasn't just me and that I couldn't carry that responsibility by myself and I had to do it differently. And so I think those are the moments. I think a lot of women of color, I have found, tend to stay longer than they should in situations that aren't working for them, whether that's personal or at work. And I think we have to really reprogram that it's okay for us to walk away when it's not working. And although we can be responsible and feel a collective, we also have to take care of ourselves. And so that's a little bit of what this discussion is. It's how do you find your individual power? And then I call that the power of me. And then how do folks like you and I work together to create the power of we? But I also think it's starts with me. Like if you're not clear, if you are not centered, if you're not healthy, and by the way, that's a big thing that I now talk about. Like I think success and health are actually combined for me. But if you had asked me 5 years ago, I didn't think success had anything to do with health. And now I will never again in my life say that I'm successful if I'm not healthy. And so those are the ways in which I think you have to be me aligned and me clear. Then you can work with others and start to push on the system. So I think all of that is really important. But for a lot of women of color, I think that sense of responsibility happened over and over. And I think it's really different for us, Daisy, as well, because I think because we do the job to do the job, but we also do the job because of that, desire to make it better for others and make it better for our sisters. Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely. There's heart in it. It's funny. I work for Vice Media, which is a youth media company. So I work with a lot of young women of color for whom health and career are intertwined. And, and so they're already there. They're already there, but they're also facing the challenges of being, perhaps not the first and the few, because of the sector that we're in, and we do have a significant number of BIPOC employees in our workforce. I think because of the nature of what we do and how we do it, but there is still this sense of this sacrifice and this, and the toll that it takes on your health. I like to say, when for me it was the realization that the toll for me was that I had diminished my voice and my courage over years, and I hadn't realized even that I did, right? That I had let go of so many parts of myself so that I could, just blend in and, in with the spirit of creating room for others. But during that trajectory, I was leaving parts of myself here and there. And by the time that I looked back, I said, I was like, who am I? I was like, where have I left myself? And so
you're not alone, Daisy. That is the 500-person story that I tried to weave together.
Yes, that's what I'm telling you.
Common. Yeah, so common.
This is the book that's what's beautiful and painful about your book, quite frankly. It's, it's got a mix of it. It's that, I think some of these stories are going to resonate. And, and I think often about, and you use the phrase, you don't have to be it. You don't have to see it to be it. And, and I've often used, in the context of, if you can see it, you can be it. Right. We use it.
Similar idea. Yes.
Yeah. And so I wonder what that means for you and what it's meant for you.
Yeah, so that was something that I wrote early on, even before I made partner. I was early in my career. I spent over 21 years in the same company, Rising. And when I didn't see role models that looked like me, and that was a real thing I think I was consciously and maybe even unconsciously looking for, and we should also talk about that. Representation matters, but I think representation also affects us as women of color in very unconscious ways, right? So that was always something I was looking for. And so I wrote that and I kept it in a draft email, and I would look at it often as a way to remind myself if I didn't see it, I could become it, right? And I had to reprogram myself to believe that. And that was, in a small way, I think, a way that I took my power back, because the idea that I had to see it for me to feel like I could be there didn't happen for me. And so that was the way that I signaled for myself it was possible. It's also when people used to say, what's your leadership style? Like, I really struggled early on because I didn't see a model that looked like me. And again, I was trying to emulate what came ahead of me. I was one of the first in my family to work outside of the home, right? I didn't have a lot of examples, didn't grow up with that. So didn't even know everything from like what to wear to how to speak to how to give feedback, right? And so I would look for leaders that looked like me. And so what I ended up doing was taking pieces from a number of different white male leaders, because that was what was around me, and then creating my own voice and molding and shaping and saying, I like this from this person, I like this from, and I'll put it together. And so that's also this idea that you don't have to exactly see what comes before you, that you can make it yourself, but you have to be very conscious of it. And so I started that early without even knowing how important that was.
Goodness, and how important it is to have deep reservoirs of sustainability, of
fortitude,
of courage, because it is hard not to see yourself. And and I think for many of us, it actually took me years to realize that was even possible, right? I entered my career in the finance space as a credit risk analyst, and and I was one of a few, and I was the first and the youngest at that time, and all of these meetings and groups that I would join. And I remember both wondering why that wasn't the case, but also not questioning so deeply that all the leadership around me was white and male, because we buy into this so deeply, and we hold back our pain and those moments of, I call it those whispers, right? We kind of whisper with each other. We find our people, right? We whisper with each other, but we don't find the places, or it takes us a long time, as you and I have, finding those places of being able to really find our voice, and to your point, fine tune our leadership style in a way that feels genuine to us, not in a way that feels that it's part of the white professional norms that we keep on being fed, and that just don't feel like they fit, right? I was like, that's just, it's like, I get it, but that just doesn't feel right.
Right. Or we'll try it for a really long time. And then at some point it'll stop working for us. That's what the book also talks about.
Yeah.
And you're kind of like, why did that stop working for me? And, that what you just shared with me is not something I think you and I would have had a conversation about 4 or 5 years ago. It would have taken us a long time to get there. So I also want to say, I think we're in a really special moment where we can, within 24, and we know each other right now. We haven't had many, many, many conversations. We've had maybe 4 or 5, within 20 minutes, we can get right to that's a real thing that we don't always see. And as a result, we edit or we conform or we adapt ourselves, and it does something to us, right? Those invisible behaviors. And I think that that's really important, because I think the more of us that talk about it, I think the more that you have conversations with your peers, the more that you acknowledge that, the less power or hold it has over you. Because I think the biggest challenge and the saddest part of the book is, there's a lot in it that, to your point, is it can be really hard, but it's mostly an uplifting, powerful kind of what you can do to find your power. But the part that I found really hard is when I would talk to the really most senior women, like literally women who had met, reached the C-suite, and they would look back in their career and wonder if the sacrifice was worth it, how much they give up of themselves was worth it. And they were kind of looking back as they were talking to me. And I don't want more of us to go through that. So that's really why I think, I love that your book is coming out too. I think we're in this moment where anything is possible. I think we're in this moment where the last couple of years have taught us we want to be different. We want to do different. And I also think we're having different conversations on inclusion that allow more women of color around us, behind us, near us, kind of unbreak this loneliness and that, that sense of isolation, or that sense that you have to become something you're not if you want to get ahead. I mean, the number one message is, I think leadership needs to evolve and to have more models so that people can choose. And so they don't think they have to give up themselves. That's really what the goal is, I think, and what both of us in a lot of ways are talking about.
I love that. And, I think one of the most exciting parts for me in working with young people is, these young women of color, they're not waiting for this. Like you and I, we're like, well, we'll wait, we'll see what happens. They're like, no. This needs to change for us now. And it's that urgency now that is really critical. But I think, what your book shows, and what, other books, and, I write about that in my own book, is that, the urgency is clear, but the roadmap is not yet.
Yes,
and you're giving us a roadmap here.
Well, we both are. I think we both are, and we need more of us. I mean, I think that's also the exciting thing is, I've had this opportunity to talk to Minda Harts quite a bit, and even when her book was coming out. I love, and I know you were on her
just on it today,
live this morning. Yeah. So I can say this to you. I feel like the fact that we also, all of us are starting to meet each other. It's not, we don't have long histories, but we want to do this differently, even as writers in this space, I think is also really different. Like there isn't a sense of Minda went first, so Minda's going to take all the space. Like when I reached out to her right away, she was like, we need more. And I say the same thing. I think we need more voices. We need more stories. We need more women of color so that we can gravitate towards the people that we feel most kindred to, because some people are going to gravitate to you, Daisy, and some are going to gravitate to me. And I want there to be more examples, right? It's not just one woman of color who's telling all these stories. So I just think it's an exciting time where I think we're cracking open and talking about the truths that we need to talk about, and then willing to kind of do some things that, that need to,
as the young people say, real talk.
Yes, real talk. Yeah.
I was on Minda's LinkedIn Live today, and she reminded me that I met her years ago when she was just starting to promote her business, pre-book, pre-writing this. And and she said that, I was like, and you brought me into your office. So I worked at Viacom at that time. And I was like, let's talk. And, she was still building her business model. And I walked her through. I was like, we're not going to buy into this now, but here's why. And here's why we need your voice. And here's why we need these communities and how powerful it is. And, because we are kindred spirits, and because we know that value. And I've always been, like I have since I met you, I was like, we have to be each other's cheerleaders to do this work. Absolutely. So Deepa, tell me, it's like, what advice is it that you have for women of color? What should women of color do, be thinking about, be imagining differently?
Yeah, so simply put, because I'm also conscious over time, simply put, I want to say, I want us to be more aware of the things we're taught, whether that comes from childhood or whether that comes from the workplaces. And I want us to be more thoughtful in rewriting narratives that don't work for us. I call that shedding, and carrying forth ones that do, and doing that power of me work. And then I want us to find our sisters, and find community, because you can't do this alone. And then I want us to question things like power and leadership, health, success. And I want us to remake those things in our own vision. And I kind of lay out what that could look like. But part of what the biggest thing I'm asking us to do is to not accept what's come before and to realize we're in a moment in time where anything that has come before can come undone. There's a great story in the book where I sat down with a lobbyist from who used to work in DC, and she was sharing with me, Deepa, you know, the saying, like, you know, king is dead, long live the king. And we unpack what that saying is, this idea that someone has just passed and we're actually putting new power into this other entity, but it's the people that give the new entity or the new king, you know, his power. And I want to say, like, that's true for all of us. Like, we, the people, give power to these things. And so I want us to really think about the structures and the systems we're in. You know, the biggest takeaway that I want, you know, whether it's women of color or allies to really understand from reading the book is that corporate America is not a meritocracy, and that it shows up fundamentally different for us than it does for others, and even may show up differently for you than it does for me. And that is an okay conversation to have. I don't feel like we've had permission to have that conversation before until very recently. And I really want us all to unpack that, because I think if we did, and if we do, and if we listen to these stories and understand how it's different and it's complex, we might actually create better belonging and more inclusive workplaces and do some things to change it. So that's really what I'm talking about.
Oh, I love this. I could go on. I could go on for much longer, but I know that Adam wants to come in and open up Q&A.
Yeah.
So I have other questions, Adam, but if we're ready, happy to.
Yeah, I'll ask a few questions and I'll turn it back over to you to give more time for audience questions. I believe it's Hattie or Haiti. Sorry, Miss Mendez, if I'm pronouncing your name wrong. What do you hope readers resonate? Yeah, okay. It's always a question when I'm just reading something and I can pronounce multiple. What do you feel will resonate most with your readers? What are you hoping readers take away from your book specifically, each of you?
Deepa, you're first. This is your
okay. Yes. So I think I said it before. I think it's really that I want them to let go that sense of alienation in the sense that they feel alone. I think that's the biggest thing. If I do nothing else, I want it to be that. You know, there was one point where I had this idea of the book being a mirror for a lot of us. And once you can, you know, see yourself in other people's stories, it might free us from the things that are ourselves. And that was really what, for me, what was the struggle. I think part of why I got sick was because I felt so responsible when things didn't go my way to try and make them better. And I used to think, just like that airplane analogy, that it was my deficiency for being so short, right? When in fact, if maybe it had been designed differently, it would actually be easier for me to put the luggage up. And so I think that's what I would say is I want you to see yourself in the book and to feel free that you can show up, you know, in the ways that feel important to you, and that you can draw boundaries so that you can be healthy at work.
Oh, I love that, Deepa. You know, and somewhat, you know, similar to my book is the audience is managers, and it's a bit of a love note to managers and aspiring managers, because as we all know, managers are the linchpin of organizations, and, you know, and who so much is, you know, is thrust upon, but who we provide very little skills to think inclusively and, you know, and to do this work. And, you know, my message to managers is you have the power. You have the power to eradicate structural inequalities in your organization. You have the power to create wonderful experiences for your employees. You have the power to be the manager that shines a light on people, not the one that dims it. And, you know, and in my book, I provide all sorts of, you know, tools and guides to do that. But one of the questions that I often ask is, what if the promises made by organizations about diversity, equity, and inclusion lasted long enough to eliminate disparities and make meaningful and permanent change? And that is possible if you take one action, one day at a time, build those muscles, and drive the change forward.
And I actually have a question that I wanted to come on and ask. Before we went live, Deepa and I were talking about women of color in the publishing industry. And Deepa, I believe you mentioned 11% of published authors, only 11% are women of color. And so I just wanted both of you to talk about more of like, what was your experience publishing your book, the behind the scenes nitty gritty that people don't really see or think about? They think of there's a successful woman who has a successful business or idea, and they have a book. That's not how it works. Just kind of talk about your experience. I'd love to hear about it.
Absolutely. Daisy, you want me to go first?
Yeah, go for it, Deepa.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. I feel like, and I talk about this in the back of the book, the acknowledgements, I feel like there was a lot of hard work, but there was also some kismet or serendipity that showed up just at the right times. So I ended up with this amazing agency, right? So I ended up signing with Richard and with Eliza, who I think might be watching. And they helped guide me through the process, but I really wasn't sure that I would be able to write a business book and that it would be sold as a business book. And it was really important to me that the book that I put together for women of color was in the business book space and not in the genre of self-help or some other very niche space. Like, I actually feel like part of the disconnect is so many of our thought leaders are white male thought leaders. And that's who we hold up as like the thought leaders and the leaders of tomorrow, and that we need more of our voice. And so it was hard because, again, there weren't a lot of those role models or those examples. And I think finding all the right people at the right times was really a little bit of kismet for me. So when I needed something, the right people would show up. But it was also really hard. And we had many conversations about market and who would buy this book, and could I write it for women of color, and who was I writing it for, and all of those things. And at the end of the day, I wrote it for women of color. And Daisy and I haven't had a chance to chat about this, but it's been really interesting because I'm mostly being interviewed by white male journalists and white male podcasters. And so, Daisy, you're like one of 3 interviews that's not. And it's a very different conversation between you and I than others. And so, in a really good sort of way, my book is actually speaking to allies who want to understand how to make the workplace better. Daisy, similar to what your book is, but I didn't necessarily go in thinking that. I wrote it for women of color. And so I'm really surprised in a good way. But yeah, Adam, it was hard because there wasn't a lot of examples, and there was a lot of like thought around like, will it sell, and what is important, and who's the demographic, and who are you writing to, and do you have to write for a bigger audience? And I held fast to what I wanted to do, although it might have been painful at points. So
Good for you, Deepa. You know, it's funny. I was just interviewed by a Hispanic executive on how to publish a book, and the first thing I said to the author of the article was, you know, there's not enough of these, you know, how to for people of color, and enter the, you know, what is predominantly still a very, not just largely white sector and industry, but also a very opaque industry, right? There's so much that you don't know about this industry. And so I have spent the last 2 years literally just learning. I just had a meeting with my publishers last week about, you know, and my agent about press. And, you know, they were asking me, what questions do you have? And I had to pause and say, I don't even know what I don't know. So I don't even know what questions to ask you. And I'm still learning how to navigate this. But a little bit like you, Deepa, there was some kismet and, you know, and some preparation. And like you, I had been in the space for some time. I had taken a year off and then started my consultancy. And as part of my consultancy, spent that year starting to write and kind of just, you know, put feelers out there to see like, will people even read what I write? I was like, will people even care? And so it started really with small articles as my way of testing the waters. And my writing and what I'd done had been so professional up to that point that I didn't have a platform beyond the companies that I'd ever worked for. And the companies that I've ever worked for were these large behemoths, you know, Google and Disney and whatnot, who didn't really let me go out there and speak on my own behalf. Everything had to be covered by a PR team, a comms team and whatnot. So by the time that I said anything, it wasn't even almost me saying it. So I had to discover my own voice and, you know, and the message that I wanted to share. And it was for me, the inspiration of all of these stories that I had accumulated over 2 decades in the workplace of people of color, women, non-normative people who had been sidelined and marginalized. I had this accumulation of stories. I was like, I have to share them, put them somewhere. And I met my agent right before we went into lockdown in 2020, who's Latina, Joanna Castillo, at Writer's House. And, you know, and Joanna had been an editor before and is now an agent. And we met in person a couple of weeks, and she instantly believed in me. And she knew that I was going to be, you know, she had to believe that I was going to be credible and that I was going to, you know, that I had something to say. And then to your point, spent some time really, you know, I had one proposal at the beginning, and I had a very different proposal by the end that went to sale. And I had a lot of no's, you know, it's just, you know, in the spirit of truth talking, I was like, I had a lot of people that were, I was like, that's a nice book. I already bought one like that, or, you know, not for us. So receiving those declinations and, you know, those rejections, but having someone on, you know, on your side that's saying, no, Daisy, like this can happen. And having someone who's Latina, whose commitment to bringing more Latino voices was there, you know, that really changed everything for me. And then Seal Press, you know, bought the book, and that was amazing. And then there's the, okay, you've spent all this time selling it and now you have to write it. So then I spent the next 8 months writing while I had a full-time job in the middle of a pandemic. So, I like to joke that while people were learning how to make bread, I was writing a book. I was like, that's what I did during that period. But like you, Deepa, trying to learn, okay, what happens next? And so then I write the book, I deliver it, and then I'm like, okay, like twiddling my thumb, what happens next? I was like, then it's editing. Then it's months and months of editing and getting it to the shape that your publisher believes it's going to be now commercial. And that dance of, they want to keep your voice, but they're still trying to make this commercial. And so that back and forth was really challenging for me. I edit everything that my team does, so that doesn't matter to me. But when you're thinking about, wait, but this is going to be my book and it's my voice, so it's got to be my message. And so there was a lot of that back and forth. And I had a really wonderful editor in Emmy Kanda at Seal Press, who trusted and honored my voice. But we had moments, we had battles every once in a while. I was like, that's not what I want to say. That's not how I want to say it. And then you deliver that final version, it's there. And then it's, okay, well, now we have to, sell this. Now it's going to go to print, and now you've got to sell. And so I call the book publishing process, there's 3 stages to it that no one ever told me. There's the ideation and selling, there's the writing and editing, and then there's the publishing and selling. And so these are some of the things that I've learned over the course of putting together this book.
And Adam, if you mind, I would add one other thing is I also think we both sold our book within a window of each other. And there were about 5 women of color who sold books within, I would say a month or 6 weeks of each other. And it felt like, and I sold my book around 6 to 8 weeks after George Floyd's murder. And so it felt like that summer, there was something where there was a desire for the publishing industry to have more voices and to do something different. My hope is that we have understood the importance of that books like ours get purchased, and that's why pre-orders were so important. That's why we keep saying to people, please buy the book and write reviews and all those things, because I think, Adam, we're in a moment where I think if the books like this, get attention and do well, I think we'll stop saying like, is that a niche book? And no, these are actually books that actually have weight and are important, and the publishing industry will continue to make more because they can't stop with us.
Absolutely. And I think that for us, Deepa, it's this context of we get pigeonholed into this box of, now you have, the Indian woman, the Latina, the Black woman, and so forth. But white men don't get put into that pigeonhole. White women don't. They can write all sorts of books about all sorts of experiences, but ours have to be really well defined. And I do think that you and I, by default, wrote about what we lived and what we experienced and the change we want to see in the world. But that doesn't mean that we can't write another, book about something completely differently, and that will still be valued, because you and I, just like others, what we have to say is going to be uniquely positioned. It's going to be unique to us, and there are people who want to hear that. Every story matters, and every story should be shared.
Yeah, just to tell a brief story, outside of this, I talked to a lot of literary fiction writers, and I remember I was talking to, I was interviewing an author, a trans author, and she said, my book got passed on, and the publisher or the agent said, we already have a trans book. And it's like, but like if I turned in a book that people loved, no one would ever be like, oh, that white guy, we already have one of those. That would never happen. That's why I always like to ask that question, because people don't realize, yes, boxes, people are still just treating people like boxes almost to check off. I think we have time for one more question. Is there anything you wish you could have included but could not because you only have a certain amount of pages, etc.? What are topics that you might write about in the future, perhaps?
Yeah, so I feel like I feel really good about everything that I got in. I've been asked this question once before, and there really wasn't anything that I felt like didn't make it because of space or because of other issues. I feel like it's an area that continues to evolve, though. And one of the things I really struggled with was I literally started writing the book that September after George Floyd's murder, right? And I feel like we're in a completely different world with vocabulary, with language, with how we talk about things. And so if there's an addendum that comes, I think it's even just as this book rolls out, and I'm realizing that there's a whole ally conversation to be had that my book touches on, but it was not the core of what I was doing. Maybe it's something like that. Maybe it's continuing to watch what happens to women of color in the workplace. I mean, Daisy, I hear you on younger women are, demanding more, but I also talk to enough women of color who are who are seeing it as, let me get into corporate, I'll do a couple of things and then I'll get out. So they don't see it as forever. So Adam, I think my thing is I want to see in the next couple of years how this plays out, and if there is true change and what happens as these companies do what they say, this performative, activities that they're saying they're going to do, how does it become real? And then I'd love to come back and see if the experience for women of color does get better, because I think it's possible. But, and I'm hopeful, but I'm worried that, not enough is changing fast enough.
I think that's such a great point, Deepa. And I think it's because of that worry and that sense of urgency that we wrote the books that we've written. I think for me, when I think of my book, I was like, I wrote a lot in it. I had to take out things, and there's something about the writing process that, you start thinking you're going to say something, for example, for me, I didn't really want to talk a lot about recruiting because that's all I've ever done. And every company wants to talk about recruiting and not spend enough time on the structures and processes that keep people from succeeding in organizations. But I ended up writing 3 chapters about it because there was so much about it. And so, there's this initial idea of what you write, and then there is, a form that comes out of it, and, and a flow that, that only comes out of the actual process of writing. I think that for me, and I think somewhat similar to Deepa, I think that, my next book, and I feel like I'll be writing forever now, will be around navigating the future of work with a lens on equity and inclusion. And that's what I've been doing for the last couple of years. And advice, we frame it as future of work culture. It's not just future of work, but it's what does the future of work culture look like? And how do you do it in a radically inclusive and equitable way? And that's what I've been, in addition to writing my book, what I've been hyper focused on the last 2 years. And I do think that it's going to be a very different leadership model, management model that is going to require all of us to rethink the way that we've been taught to manage people. And we've seen it already in the last year and a half, but it's more compassion, more competency, more capabilities to lead inclusively. And so I've been writing a lot about that with my teams. I do a weekly note to my teams every Monday. They get a note from me around my reflections on what's happening in the world of work in particular. And I've been collecting those over the years. And I think that there's something really unique about what we have been. And then what is this moment of experimentation that we're going to be entering? We're still not even fully in. We think we're in it, but we haven't really fully in. We haven't even fully returned to offices. So it's when that happens, I think it's that negotiation and what I call the co-creation of the future of work, which is going to be both with employees and employers together.
Ladies, thank you both so much for taking the time to join Tattered Cover. Deepa, congratulations on your book coming out. Daisy, congratulations on yours coming soon. Where can people find you on the internet? What's the best way to connect with both of you?
Yeah, so my website is probably the best place, where it talks about all the places I'm speaking and even about the company information if folks are interested. So it's Deepa Puru, DeepaPuru.com. And those are also my handles everywhere. So either place. But I'm really trying to share a lot of what I'm doing right now, because it does feel like there's a real appetite for this conversation, which is also really exciting, Adam. So I also want to thank you for holding space for us, because I a couple of years ago, this might not have been possible. And so I really appreciate making space for us.
Oh goodness, that is so true. For me, Adam, is also my website. It's Daisy Auger Dominguez. It's a really long name, but just look for Daisy AU and then you'll find me. And then LinkedIn is the space that I'm most active in. I call them my people. LinkedIn is my people. This is where I get to talk and learn and exchange, and really deepen community with other folks who are either like-minded or who want to learn and do this work. And I think there's space for all of us to do this work together.
Definitely. Well, thank you both so much. And Daisy, I want to apologize. I believe I mispronounced your last name.
Well, that's okay.
Because Deepa and I had a long conversation, but because you joined so late, I forgot to ask you. But it is important. It is important that, names are important. And so I just want to apologize. You can find Tattered Cover at tatteredcover.com. You can pre-order Daisy's book there now. You can buy Deepa's book now. They will get to you soon. If you don't order from us, order from another independent bookstore. I'm not supposed to say that, but I do want to say, don't go to the place where everything's cheap.
Yes,
independent
let's
bookstores
support you all. Yes, in the work.
So, but tatteredcover.com has books.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Terrific. Well, ladies, thank you so much. And thank you to everyone who watched.
Thank you, Adam, for having us.
Thank you.